Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. I'm thrilled to welcome you all to Giving Project's Growing Power, our first public event as the Giving Project Network, which is a collaboration of the 10 social justice funds across the United States and occupied Hawaii who are using the Giving Project model. My name is Shan Miranda Sango-Foilan, and I'm one of the co-directors of the Giving Project Network. My work as a co-director is focused on representing the network externally, connecting with folks like many of you all here, interested in piloting the Giving Project model and building our relationships with funding partners to support the model and our network. We're so pleased to have the Neighborhood Funders Group also co-sponsoring our event today and helping us spread the word so we can share this model with funders who are clear about moving resources to community organizing for systemic change. Our agenda for today will include an opening to get grounded and connected in the model and with each other. We'll have a panel where you'll get to hear from a few of the brilliant practitioners of the Giving Project model about how this model advances the social justice mission of the funds that they work at and in the context that they are operating. And then we'll have some time at the end to break into small breakout groups to get to discuss, ask questions, and think through what's next and how you'd like to get or stay connected to this work, for example, by piloting the model or funding the model. And with that, I'll turn it over to my co-director, Tracy Ganyu.
Hey everyone, I am co-director with Shan, and I'm really focused on the internal peer learning community. And you all are now part of our community, and we wanted to start by getting a sense of who is in the room. Yeah, so go ahead and scroll through and see who's here. Just take a minute and browse this beautiful gallery of people you are in community with. We all share a vision for well-resourced liberation movements. Welcome. And yeah, we love the Giving Project model, and we're so excited to share it with you. And before we dive into the nitty-gritty specifics, we wanted to invite you to get grounded in whatever space you're in, wherever you are. And at that, I'm going to turn it to my colleague, Michael, at Grassroots Fund in Chicago.
Thank you, Tracy. Hi, everyone. Inviting you into a grounding practice before we get started, recognizing there are a lot of different folks from a lot of different places gathered here today, a lot of different time zones. So just using this as a time to gather ourselves, to be reminded of why we're here. And we do these grounding practices just to be present, to be open, connected. But it's also to help us and remind us to feel more, not to feel less, that it's okay to bring our full selves and wherever we're coming from into this space. So you can do this practice with the camera on or off. Welcome you to do it with your eyes open or closed. And just a peek of a window into how we start a lot of our meetings here with the Giving Project. So inviting you to connect with your breath. Bringing yourself to this moment, into this space. We're going to center in 4 dimensions along our length, our width, our depth, and our commitments. Feeling along your length first. This is our plane of dignity. Something you can feel that you're born with, that you can see in others. Along our width, across our shoulders, torso, to our bellies and hips. This is our capacity to connect with community, our capacity for ourselves and each other. Now along our depth, from our back to front, where our ancestors live along our backs, the words of wisdom that we carry with us. And then to our fronts, where our commitments and values live, and where we can manifest our intentions for today in this meeting. Deep breath here. Whenever you're ready to join us, come back. And I'll pass it back to Tracy.
Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate that. Welcome everyone, whatever space you're in. So I wanted to transition us into what the Giving Project is. I'm an alumni, and I remember that when I did my first Giving Project, I wasn't quite sure what I was getting into. It sounded great, 6 months, political education, fundraising, making grants, I'd be with other people. But what was it? I really had to trust my co-facilitators to take me through the experience, and a big shout out to SJF for that. And we wanted to distill those 6 months into something that would take less than 6 minutes to explain. So we're gonna do my best to tell you about the Giving Project by using a beehive analogy. So here is a new image that we have. And I'd like you to think of the Giving Project cohort as a community of bees, roughly 20 people across race and class. The hive itself represents the container of the Giving Project, where participants build a shared political analysis around race and class to ground their donor organizing or their one-on-one fundraising asks and the grant making process. So through a collection of storytelling, grounding in history and local conditions, self-reflection, sharing experiences, right? The cohort builds community united in the shared purpose to move money to movements. Once that foundation has been built together, the participants are asked to make a personally meaningful gift. They're asked to reflect on their wealth, their means, about what is meaningful to them and what is possible given their current conditions. This might be the equivalent of a month's rent or the gas bill, maybe the value of a semester at college. It's often the largest gift that person has made. It's true for me. And whatever the amount, it's celebrated and goes into the collective honeypot. So from there, participants go out into their communities and pollinate, right? They're spreading pollen, they're organizing their people, they're talking about their experience, they're talking about social justice movements, they're talking about the fund they're representing, they're talking about possible grantees, and at the same time, they're collecting nectar. Right? They're collecting resources. They're making individual asks and bringing back those dollars and stories into the collective honeypot. So all of that nectar, the meaningful gifts and the individual asks gets turned into honey, which are the grants. Participants use a democratic decision-making process grounded in their shared race and class analysis to make grants to grassroots community organizers. This process involves reading grants, assessing them on a shared criteria of community organizing, doing site visits, and making final decisions together. At the end of 6 months, not only has this community of 20 or so bees moved money to social justice movements, which can range anywhere from about $70,000 to $450,000 per Giving Project, they have also organized their own people, bringing them into movement. On average, we're seeing around 250 people organized per Giving Project. So you can see that represented by the honeycomb, right? It's like all the people, it's the money and the people that are moved. So it's huge, right? There's a lot going on. There's a lot of pieces moving together. And I just want to lift that up, that nothing about the Giving Project is unique on its own. It's really the combination of everything working together and building off of each other. And you just can't do one piece and expect the same profound experience and outcome. So if you want to see another version of that beehive analogy, we have one on our website that's narrated. So you can find it there. We'll drop a link into the chat. And I just invite you, if you have any questions throughout today's session, please put them in the chat box and we'll do our best to answer them there. And then we'll also have time in our breakout groups for more questions. So at that, I'm going to pass it to Shan.
Thanks, Tracy. So now that you all have a sense of what the Giving Project model is, this is a visual representation of the network. So the Giving Project Network strategic plan, we turned it into a visual, and I feel so fortunate. I came into the network about a year ago when there was a really clear strategic plan, this has been really useful for our work. So in looking at this visual, we start up on the right-hand corner with our vision of well-resourced liberation movements that when Tracy did the opening earlier, we talked about how that's a vision that many of us share, right? So that's kind of our guiding light there. Represented across the bottom of the visual by the water is the conditions that we work in, right? So we are in a moment of a series of different crises, a global pandemic, the crisis of systemic racism, and the crises in general of racial capitalism and imperialism around the world. We're in a moment of change. We're also, many of us, facing institutional changes and organized efforts to change the field of philanthropy to be more in alignment with social justice. So we have to both be responsive to these conditions, and our collective actions also shape and inform these conditions. So we think about how we move from these current conditions toward our vision. And in doing that, we use the Giving Project model as one program, as one vehicle to move us through these conditions toward this vision. So as you can see with the boat image, at the top, there are kind of the components that make the Giving Project unique that Tracy mentioned with the beehive analogy. And at the bottom of the visual, there are the values that are core to the model and core to our network. In particular, I want to lift up our commitment to collective liberation, to Black liberation, and decolonization. In particular, we know that in this structure of racial capitalism, if we want all of us to be free, we know that we have to really center Black liberation and Indigenous sovereignty in order to collectively move toward liberation. And we do all of this work in the network with this model, with these values, for the goal, as you'll see kind of on the top left under Giving Project Network, with the goal of building a base of donor organizers who are skilled and connected enough to effectively move money to movements in effective and accountable ways. So grounded in all of this purpose and these conditions with this vision, our purpose and our priorities for the network, you'll see represented by the map on the left side, is the internal learning community that we host as a network, and the external replication, the external work, which includes replication and fundraising for the long-term sustainability of the Giving Project model and replicating the model in different places. And thank you to Karen for doing our tech and so beautifully highlighting the pieces of the visual. So we're going to shift gears here, and we use this visual on a regular basis to ground ourselves in our network meetings. It's usually the first thing we share with new folks that we're talking to keep us focused on our vision and our purpose as a network. So now, to get deeper into the strategic value of the Giving Project model in the ecosystem of social justice movements, we're going to get to hear from a panel of Giving Project practitioners, and they're going to center on the question, why the Giving Project? What is strategic about the Giving Project model in your fund and in your local context?
And I'll just add, thank you, Shan, for that, that we want this to be a conversation as much as possible. There's over 80 of us on this call together. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat box. We have a couple of chat monitors, and we'll be answering questions there. We'll also be feeding a couple to our panelists if we have time for that. And then also know that we'll have time again in our breakout rooms for questions. So yes, please ask away.
And okay, and just an invitation, we'll have about 30 minutes for the panel. If turning your camera off we'll help you listen if you want to go for a walk. If there's anything that you want to be able to do to be present and also be listening, you're welcome to do that during this time. We try to encourage, with all the Zoom time, people being in their bodies while they're listening and participating. So with that, I am pleased to introduce our panelists, and they'll come up on the screen as I introduce them. So moderating our panel will be Nigel Charles. Nigel is the Director of Donor Organizing at Bread and Roses Community Fund in Philadelphia, where he facilitates 2 of the 4 giving projects that Bread and Roses hosts each year. And he also leads the team of Giving Project facilitators. And Nigel is also our co-chair of the Giving Project Network Steering Committee. Welcome, Nigel. Crystal Middlestat will also be joining the panel. Crystal is the Executive Director of the Chinook Fund in Colorado, which runs 2 giving projects per year. And Crystal is also on the board of Resource Generation and brings their background in grassroots fundraising from GIFT. And Crystal came into Chinook from a grantee organization in Colorado as well. Welcome, Crystal. So glad you're here. Next up, we have Jillian White. Jillian is a donor organizer at the North Star Fund in New York City. Jillian completed their first giving project last year as a facilitator, and they broke a record with more than 700 donors donating to the giving project. They pivoted to virtual facilitation, and Jillian comes to this work from a background in community organizing projects rooted in healing, justice, Indigenous sovereignty, and Black liberation. Welcome, Jillian. Next up, we have Allison Johnson-Heist. Allison's the program director at Headwaters Foundation for Justice in Minnesota. Allison was the first Giving Project facilitator at Headwaters and actually built out the Giving Project program and has facilitated 5 Giving Projects and is now supporting new leadership on the Giving Project facilitation team. And Allison also serves on the board of Resource Generation as well. And last but definitely not least, we have Mickey Hui Hui, a Native Hawaiian who is the executive director of the Hawaii People's Fund. Hawaii People's Fund just 2 days ago completed their first Giving Project pilot, and we're so excited about that. They raised $180,000, exceeding their goal and having a great, just really phenomenal experience. And so you'll get to hear about all of that soon. So with all of that, I'm so glad to listen to you all. I'm really excited about it, and I'll pass it over to Nigel.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this call today to talk about really one of my favorite topics, which is the Giving Project. I've had the privilege, and to some probably a bit annoying, to talk about this everywhere I go, even in my personal life, about what this work has done. I think today you're going to hear some stories, you're going to hear probably some numbers, you're going to probably hear some statistics, but I really hope that you hear about what the model does, right? To really hear about the transformations that happen when people really commit themselves to this model. I really believe that this is a really, really awesome panel that you're going to hear from. I'm really excited to, get out of the way and let them talk about what the Giving Project means in their organization. But I wanted to set the table just a little bit and talk about what the Giving Project has meant for me personally and for Bread and Roses Community Fund, where I work at in Philadelphia. I think it's important to talk about just the context that I learned about the Giving Project. I grew up in Philadelphia in a really weird neighborhood where poverty and excess actually lived really close to each other. But there were these very clear demarcations of where you could go, what you could do in those different spaces. There was not a lot of cross-pollination between the people who lived in those different spaces. So I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment where there were a number of issues. Right down the street was a park and a river where more affluent, mostly white kids got to play. And I knew that wasn't a space for me. I knew that the space for me was the neighborhood schools basketball courts. That's where we got to go. And I saw this happening all around me, right? I was in a school where I had to commute to and saw the neighborhoods change and saw that different people had access to different things. And I think from that point at a young age, I struggled with that concept and wanted to figure out ways to move resources, right? So I was saying things like that when I was young and trying to figure out how to do that. I did not know at that time that there was an organization who was doing just that. Brennan Rose's Community Fund for 40 years has been doing that exact work. So I find it fortunate that I was able to be introduced to Brennan Rose's Community Fund at the time when they had just brought in the Giving Project model. Brennan Rose's Community Fund has its roots, right? Its foundation in moving resources for movements of liberation, in community grant making processes, in bringing diverse groups of people together to make decisions together. And it was something that I did not even really know existed. I remember going to professors in school and asking them, where can I get this? And they said, well, you'd have to build it. And I knew that was counter to what I had heard. I'd heard stories about my grandfather in Trinidad organizing people in the oil fields. I lived in a neighborhood in Philadelphia where there was a history of organizing. But I think as with movements, there are ebbs and flows where the information is really easy for us to access. And there are other times when the information is a little bit more difficult for some people to access. So I got brought into Brennan Rose's at a time where they had just completed their first giving project and were really realizing that this model allowed the organization to tap back into its roots, to do what it had been purposed and designed to do, and to do it in this really, really amazing way. And I think what you'll hear today from this group of people is that sometimes transformation is, a new lease on life, but other times that transformation is really us being able to become more of ourselves. And I think that's the case with Brennan Rose's. And I think that's the space that I've been allowed working with Brennan Rose's as well. And I think when we are allowed to be grounded and rooted in our history and the ways that the Giving Project allows organizations and participants and facilitators to do that, we produce more, right? To be grounded, to be rooted is the possibility of being able to produce more. And I think you're going to hear a little bit more about that as well. So I'd love to bring in our panelists now. I'm going to go to Crystal first and really want to hear about the role that the Giving Project has played in your organization. I know that it has opened doors for you all to approach your work in different ways. And I'd love for you to just share that with everyone in this virtual room.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nigel. It's so great to be here. I'm the executive director of Chinook Fund. I joined in 2018. And I do come to this work as a former grantee leading queer and trans anti-violence organizing in Colorado. And I've learned so many lessons in these past few years. I grew up in a small town in Oregon. I come from a working class family of paper mill workers, bartenders, homemakers. I'm queer, non-binary, mixed race, Japanese and white, and the first person in my family to get a college degree. Many experiences that are not common within philanthropy. Chinook Fund, we've been around since 1987. We're a community foundation that funds social justice organizations across Colorado. And over the course of our history, we've distributed $3.6 million. And the average budget size of our grantees is only $100,000. We have a super small team. Our staff has grown from 3 to 5, and our annual operating budget has recently doubled to 1.3 million, with half of that going directly back out to communities through our grant making. So we launched the Giving Project in 2016. We've run 8 giving projects, 2 a year on average. We've supported 150 members to collectively raise $826,000 from 2,500 donors. And our grant making has doubled or even tripled in some years. And our fall 2020 cohort was able to raise $240,000 from 600 donors over the course of 6 months. And with those funds, they were able to fully fund their approved docket of 18 groups and provide $70,000 in multi-year grants that we'll disperse in 2022. So it was really exciting to be able to celebrate that. So some of the things that I've learned and we've learned as an organization are, one, the political education and storytelling around race, class, and systems of power really cultivates a sense of belonging, wholeness, and collective power that many of our donors are longing for. The relationship-based donor organizing model of the Giving Project has really broadened my own thinking of who belongs in social justice work. It's provided Chinook Fund a structure to continually adapt to quickly changing conditions affecting our grantees. And it's enabled us to grant more dollars, which is why we're here and what our real purpose is. I've also learned that action is a key component of the Giving Project model. So at Chinook Fund and across the network, we really push our members to go beyond education and awareness and to resist white supremacy, the culture of perfectionism, the fear of making mistakes, the fear of saying the wrong thing. So our facilitators and our members practice accountability, but also compassionate support so that when mistakes and harm do occur, we create a space where members can learn and they can do differently. And that really also provides a form of critical movement support because it's educating and challenging donors to see themselves as organizers of the resources that our grantees need. Implementing the Giving Project with the support of this network has also really sharpened Chinook Fund's racial justice framework and our intersectional analysis. And it's helped to change our grant making practices for the better. So when you invite this level of political education, you're also opening your organization up to questions and critique and new conversations. And it's really pushed us and helped us to center leadership even more so from the communities that are most impacted and to more fully live into our values. So just last year, 90% of our grantees were BIPOC led and a third of those were Black led organizations. The last piece I want to lift up that we've learned is that the model creates space for new leadership from many communities traditionally excluded or marginalized within philanthropy. So we have a really active Giving Project alumni network of about 150 individuals that includes also some current and former grantees. We have co-chairs each year that we work with and they steward programming. They recently hosted an AAPI power panel. They host monthly Black caucusing for the alumni. They hosted a Get Out the Vote safety planning session last fall. And that's been a really great source of support as well for volunteer facilitation. And within our network, almost half of our members are currently or were raised in families that are poor or working class. So again, really looking at those intersections around race and class. So really happy to be here today for the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you for sharing all that about your organization. I think one thing I heard in your answer was the importance of political education in your process. And one thing that you said in there was that it was beyond education and awareness. When I think of that, I also oftentimes think about the way that North Star approaches the Giving Project. I'm always learning from you all about the ways that you bring people in and you support them in that political education process. So Jillian, I'd love to bring you into the conversation and the larger question of where does the Giving Project fit into your organization strategically, but I'd love to hear about like the ways that political education plays an important role in the ways that you approach it.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Nigel. And Crystal, thank you for your reflections as well. Just hearing you talk reminded me to like bring myself into the conversation. And so I'll just start by saying like, I'm an Afro-Indigenous queer femme. I am a first-generation college student. I carry significant debt. And I know that these are identities that are not naturally at home in the fields of philanthropy. And I've had that experience. And I'm just really grateful to have landed here in this sector of the work where I can show up much more fully as myself, doing this work with integrity and with people who are so clearly committed to liberation in our lifetimes. So just a lot of gratitude for all of you. To give some context for North Star Fund, that's where I work. I'm the donor organizer. We support grassroots organizing led by communities of color, building power in New York City, as well as the Hudson Valley. And as of this past March, as an organization, we've made over $81 million, or we've put out $81 million in grants to over 2,400 community organizations. And we're, yeah, really incredibly proud of the journey that we've been on. And yeah, the Giving Project is not our primary mode of grant making. Instead, we rely on community funding committees led by experienced organizers and community members. So they're the ones making our grants. No one on staff is doing that. Prior to COVID and the uprisings, North Star Fund committed to a new strategic plan. And in that plan, we explicitly outlined our responsibility to dismantle white supremacy in our organization, as well as in the broader field of philanthropy. And these priorities only became clearer and more urgent for us over the last year as the political conditions were changing and we were all grappling with the pandemic. We adapted the Giving Project model to make it in deeper alignment with our model of community-led grant making and our movement priorities. So our last cycle and going forward, we've decided to link our Giving Project to the Let Us Breathe Fund, which supports Black-led organizing. And in doing so, we believe that it also increases the sustainability of the fund and reflects our priorities that were outlined in the strategic plan. So like Nigel was saying, our Giving Project is, we highly emphasize political education and donor organizing. And I'm gonna just share a little bit more about what that actually looks like. So the Giving Project is a structured space to engage donors and provide political training on race, class, and at North Star, we also really focus on racial capitalism. Prior to launching our People Power Giving Project, North Star Fund piloted a program called Springboard. And Springboard brought together individuals with access to wealth and provided opportunities for them to have political education and practice grant making. The reflective analysis that happened after Springboard was just that it too heavily centered educating and centering traditional donors and didn't disrupt the power dynamic of wealthy individuals as decision makers. So as Springboard was phased out, North Star moved more towards like a more robust theory of donor organizing that prioritizes shifting power. And the Giving Project has been the real highlight of that. So we're cross-class, we're multiracial, and we are committed to redefining who can be, but also who has already and always been a donor. And we do that by highlighting the legacies of fundraising and resource mobilization of poor, working class, and communities of color in New York. The Giving Project provides like structured space for like philanthropic staff, grantees, both like development folks at our grantee orgs, as well as organizers, board members, and community members, all to come together and to be in this process of political education and also reflection together. And that's just incredibly rare. There are so few spaces where you're able to bring together these cross sections. We're also really rooted in praxis. So combining theory and action is essential to us. So our fundraising work is also what keeps us accountable to our movement partners. The Giving Project for us is not just about political education for the sake of political education or personal transformation. It is accountability. It is our way of really showing up for our movement partners and like maintaining those relationships. The Giving Project has also really been an opportunity for staff engagement in the program, and it's an internal opportunity for us to also be working on our own political development. In the past, North Star has like tried out different ways of staffing the Giving Project. We've had a rotation of staff members. We've also had a core team. Right now we have a core team. Kofo is also on this call. And we have a consultant that we work with. And yeah, just what I wanted to really say about that is that it's an opportunity for us to participate alongside our community members because we are equal with them. We are in this with them. Ongbin, who's also on the call, was our first staff member to fully participate this past year. And so she actively fundraised alongside our cohort. I also fundraise, and I think that, it's an opportunity for us to model relational organizing and to bring our personal networks and communities along with us in this process. And just the absolute final thing that I'll say is that although North Star is not dependent on the Giving Project to make our grants, It's really an essential element of our donor organizing and how we approach political education with that community.
Awesome. Thank you, Jillian, for sharing that. I love how you talked about the disruption of traditional systems and shifting power, and especially you talking about relational organizing, because I think that's just where real organizing happens. That's where we see the organizing yield and the fruits of the labor there. I want to go to Allison now, and really hear more about what does that disruption actually look like in real time. I think over the last year, more than a year now, we've seen these challenges to these systems, these communities of people saying that they need the influence and the power that is deserved by them. And I think you all saw that in real time. I wanted to hear about how that fit into your organization, and how the Giving Project has supported you all through this moment.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Johnson Heist, she, her, based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I am a staff member at Headwaters, came into this work as an intern of a grantee organization. That's how I got to know what a foundation is. It supported the work that I was doing as an intern, and then got the opportunity to work volunteer as a community-led grant maker before I came on staff through Headwaters. So I've been able to see this work in different iterations and different sides of the equation over the years. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to share from our part of the country, I wanted to talk about how the Giving Project responded to the uprising after the murder of George Floyd. So Headwaters has been funding movement organizations in Minnesota led by and for people of color for nearly 40 years, like many of the funds in this group. We piloted the Giving Project model 6 years ago, and it breathed new life into this organization. So now we are on our 7th cycle of grant making through the Giving Project and have raised nearly $1 million with this model, with contributions from over 1,500 donors. And so last May, exactly a year ago tomorrow, our 6th Giving Project with 19 participants was in full swing in a virtual way when a Minneapolis police officer murdered George Floyd. And the chaos, the police violence, and the civil unrest that followed launched our community into the global spotlight. And with so much that was uncertain around us, we knew that the Giving Project needed to continue. We understood that holding together this process and supporting participants involved in whatever ways we could was something worth doing. And they had already together raised $100,000, and our participants began looking for ways to make meaning out of what was happening and also make a difference in the moment. So in the middle of the uprising, Headwaters moved in alignment with our values and made adjustments in how we do our work in service of collective liberation. One example of that was canceling the remaining site visits that were already underway because we did not want to get in the way of important work happening in the movement around us. We also met participants where they were at and made sure that they knew that they were valued and that we recognized that their gifts and time as labor in our community mattered just as much as their participation in the Giving Project and the amount that they raised. And so the Giving Project offered this support and space to our multiracial cross-class group of participants to dig in and fundraise for our movements. And these folks mobilized by sharing information during the uprising with one another, amplifying mutual aid needs and requests in their neighborhoods, and making bold asks within their networks. And so for these participants, the Giving Project really provided hope and a course of action. And we also learned that the Giving Project serves an important purpose in our broader community. It's a vessel for learning and action that really holds up and can be of service in moments of crisis. I think about the visual that Shan shared from our strategic plan with the ship, right? Like that the container is the Giving Project, and it held us and held our community during this time. So with matching funds from Headwaters network of grassroots donors, the 19 participants moved $210,000 to 14 BIPOC-led organizations in Minnesota, many of whom were activating and supporting their communities in real time during the uprising. And because of our commitment to the Giving Project learning community to this group, Headwaters has really been on an intentional journey to center Black liberation, Indigenous sovereignty, decolonization, and racial justice, and not just in the Giving Project, but across our whole foundation. And we really felt supported and sustained by our colleagues across the network during this last year. We are not the first fund to do this work in a time of crisis, and we will not be the last. And so what we know is that we need one another, and this model is successful because it creates accountability and supportive community for staff, just as much as it does for our participants, right? Staff across our networks of funds. So one Giving Project participant from that round summarized their experience last year. I'm just going to share a quote from them. They said, "I'm so amazed by how incredibly generous we have been with ourselves and with each other. We have internal abundance." And I feel like that summarizes how we at Headwaters feel to be part of this network too.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Allison. I think similarly, many of our organizations can talk about just how important a role the Giving Project has played in our organizations. At Bread and Roses, we're about 13 Giving Projects in since 2016. We've seen our donor base jump by maybe 3 times what it was before we brought the model in. We've been able to give out at least $150,000 in all of those Giving Projects. And we still see new organizations picking it up. So I'd love to talk to Mickey about what does the Giving Project look like in year 1? You all 2 days ago just finished your first Giving Project, and you were just reminding us the 3 o'clock in the morning times you were joining our virtual sessions just to sit in and learn a little bit more about it. I'd love for you to just share, how has it been for you incorporating the Giving Project model? What has it meant for Hawaii's People Fund?
Mahalo. Ke aloha mai kākou, o ao miki hui hui, no puahala kane o he mai au, he Hawaii au. My name is Mickey Hui Hui, and I am blessed to serve as the Executive Director of Hawaii People's Fund. Mahalo to Sean and Tracy and the Giving Project Network for welcoming us so warmly into the Ohana, and for ushering in a major evolution in how we do what we do on so many levels. And mahalo to everyone for being here today. You're likely here because you're either curious or committed to transformation. And that's what's going on here. So Hawaii People's Fund, our mission is to fund, support, and amplify the work of Hawaii-based grassroots organizations that are challenging systems of oppression. And we're the only organization in the world specifically addressing the needs of grassroots progressive movement builders in Hawaii. We were initially formed in response to short-sighted development efforts, economic and social disparities, and indigenous dispossession. And for almost 50 years, our Ohana has challenged these inequities by resourcing and advocating for those who are upending and healing the effects of it. Giving Project has taken our intermediary work of community giving and community doing to the next level, sending this very clear signal to everyone watching the world rise right now that we're serious about investing in the massive change that's happening and ensuring that our Indigenous and BIPOC communities are heard, served, and centered. The Giving Project has been propagating in the HPF ethers for a few years, and the timeliness and alignment of this launch is a reflection of our legacies, our current realities, and what is being asked of us as an organization and as a community in this massive movement moment. In January of this year, after 6 months of learning and growing alongside our colleagues in the Giving Project Ohana, mahalo Nigel and Karen, and the Bread and Roses Ohana, and to the Chinook Fund in Denver for taking us under your wings. We recognize that the communities we serve already have the power. They have the solutions, and Giving Project helps redirect community-raised resources from previously untapped networks through that advocate-led decision-making to fuel this community-centered power, amplifying the reach of our partnership of activists and donors who share a vision of a just and equitable Hawaii. So it's very much in line with what the People's Fund has been up to since 1972, but in a laser-focused way. We wrapped, like Nigel said, we wrapped our first Giving Project 2 days ago. And this new way of doing what we do has exceeded all expectations that we had. Not only did Giving Project inspire 18 cross-class, cross-race, intergenerational participants, 75% of which had no prior connection to HPF or each other before we began. Engaged in twice a month sessions spent in deep political analysis, sharing and building together, and learning about our grantees and the work they're doing in community. They took their advocacy to their networks and called in $180,000 in just under 3 months. 730 small gifts, big gifts, all swirled around together, including over 500 new supporters of HPF in our work. This abundance is being deployed to grassroots organizations making real impact in the social change landscape in Hawaii. These folks reached in and they said, yes, I want to talk about this hard stuff. And yes, I want to come with solutions on how to make Hawaii better. And identifying who in the community is working to change these inequitable systems and dynamics, dissolving those lines between philanthropy and charity by creating active roles for those wanting to redistribute wealth and do more through this engagement and reflection on our own roles as individuals to impact our beloved Hawaii in meaningful and positive ways. And this evolution, I'm not just talking about the dollars raised, right? As is the way we do in Hawaii, we intentionally centered Pilina in our Giving Project. And Pilina is a deep and meaningful connection. As most can attest, this is super tough to do on Zoom, but because we live on small islands and we'll always run into each other or work with each other or be 2 people away from everybody, we tailored our curriculum specifically so the cohort could stay connected and continue to make good trouble together when the Giving Project was over. And because we uplifted Pilina and authentic connection, I believe we cracked our organization wide open to the potential and power of connectivity within our beloved community. It evolved just about every facet of the People's Fund. The way we talk about what we do, our potential as donor organizers, and shifted us out of a mindset of scarcity into one of total abundance. This is our first program outside of our regular and urgent action grant making. And there's a unique leadership and organizational capacity building component as well. Our board president was a participant, as were current grant makers, HPF's new staff, and past and hopefully future HPF leadership. This has been crucial in transparency of the new program and super important seasoned guidance and familiarity within the cohort have been champions in conveying the possibilities of this model to the rest of our leadership. The Giving Project connects giving to a deeper understanding on the systems of oppression and play, which in Hawaii is so multi-layered in light of the continued occupation of the Hawaiian Kingdom by the US. And it connected folks directly with the grassroots organizations who are the story of social change in Hawaii. We connected cohort members with each other, connected them with their grantees, they connected us with their networks, our grantees connected with each other. And all of this connectivity organically led to massive fund shifting success, which meant more money out the door into community organizing, which is what the Giving Project is all about, and a perfect supplement to what HPF has been all about since 1972. So Giving Project has literally transformed our organization. It shaped what it's going to look like for us for years to come. And we are so, so grateful to be a part of this magic. Mahalo. Mahalo.
so much, Mickey. We're right about at our time to transition to our next part of this virtual event. I did want to close with just a reflection that I've seen. I've been part of Bread and Roses since 2016, early in our Giving Project days. And it's amazing to see how the Giving Project has changed and transformed in that time by bringing in community members into our organizations and giving them decision-making power. It has made us so much more accountable to our communities, and we have transformed. And I think it's really important to highlight that what we're trying to do is build something that's never existed before. It is informed by a legacy of community organizers and people who have given their lives even to this work. And we pick up that mantle and we carry it in this particular model. And to be able to do that in community with other funders and organizations across the country who are doing that at the same time has been a great space for learning, for experimentation. The truth is we're all gonna make mistakes in this work, but doing this in community means that I don't have to make every mistake. It means that when a mistake is made somewhere else or where a success is made somewhere else, that I can learn from those things and I can bring that to my space. So I count it a huge fortune to be able to do this work with you all. I really found it a pleasure to hear all of you talk about your projects and look forward to us continuing on in this work together.
Thank you, everybody. I think I'm going next. Thank you, Nigel, Mickey, Jillian, Kristen, and Allison. I'm so moved. I know I do this work, but just even being here it's just really moving.
Jane, I'm sorry to interrupt you. It looks like we can't, oh, there you are in your video. Okay, great. Just wanted to see your face.
Oh, you can see me. Okay, yeah. So did you hear what I said, or do you want me to repeat? I don't need to repeat. But anyway,
you're good. Go ahead.
So much love to everybody. I know, I mean, this is family to me, so I'm really grateful. So my name is Jane Kimondo, and I'm the Executive Director of Grassroots Fund, and I'm based in Chicago. I'm also so proud to be co-chair of the Giving Project Network with Nigel. So just a great honor. Grassroots Fund has very much like headwaters. We are on our 7th Giving Project, and it has changed our organization in the same way that you've heard a lot of people say. It has changed me. I think I continue to learn and continue to just be a better person because of this. And as you've learned from my friends on the panel, this work is hard. We are trying to change systems that have been there for decades and centuries. It's also personal. Like we're doing this work, experiencing it, and trying to change it at the same time. And it also requires a lot of resources. So each Giving Project takes about 1,000 hours of staff time minimum, because it's deep touch, as we call it, which means that whatever we raise is not able to cover those costs. So even as we're bringing people in, doing all this transformational work, doing everything that we have to do, we have to fundraise. And so we've been fundraising like there's no tomorrow, because we believe that this work has to go on. The work of bringing people across race, class, identity, and in different parts of the country. And we also believe that this work is going to get us closer to liberation, both for ourselves and our community. That has been said over and over again, and we strongly believe it. So some of you have asked how you can be involved beyond thinking about hosting a Giving Project, being a participant, and some have said that, oh, we'd like to fund this work. And that is music to our ears. So if you want to, where we feel funding could go or support, and I know we didn't warn you that we're going to do this ask, and this could be solicitation-free zone, but as good fundraisers, no opportunity goes unfundraised, right? So just forgive us for that little oversight. But when you're thinking about where your resources go, we really want you to think about the Giving Project Network. This is a learning community we've created over the years. We have supported it ourselves, and we've also had a few of our friends support it, but we want to think 10 years out, 20 years out, not 2 years out, because we're trying to do some work that's going to take centuries. So how do you be part of this work and help us dream, and dream with resources and from a place of abundance, as opposed from dreaming like year to year. Year to year dreams don't get us to that liberation that we so badly want. So we're asking you, please join us and thinking about this, and just look at the amazing work that's going on throughout the country. If national is not something you can do, what about the network or the fund that's in your backyard? Just like look at the map, see who's next to you, and can you fund it? If folks have never funded Hawaii, this is the moment. Hawaii needs us, like they're on our the first one. So again, just thinking about funding the network as a whole or the individual funds. Shane and myself are here. We'll answer all your questions, and we'll also ask you some questions, but this is a way that we can promote this. And our intentions and our hope is that anybody anywhere can participate in a giving project to move money in an intentional and deliberate way. So thank you so much.